Up, people?
Hey, great day, great day. What's up, everybody?
Yes, sir. What's up, Greg?
What's going on, Jason?
Much. How's everybody doing? We'll give it a couple minutes as always. If there's anything anybody wants to bounce off me, specific to what they got going on, fire away. Happy to help.
Hey, Jason, Laura Lamanna, how are you?
Hey, Laura, I'm well. How are you?
Good. It's a question.
Yeah.
So I had a great year
Mm-hmm.
and
Congrats.
I did about 7.5, 8 million.
Awesome.
And now all of a sudden, every avenue seems dry.
Sure.
And I don't know, is it because the market is changing? The interest rates are crazy? I don't know, I guess I know what to do, but I guess what is the best thing to do?
Yeah. So I mean, if you can look yourself in the mirror and know that you're consistent with your activities that you should be doing to meet your goals and what your business plan tells you to, right? That's step one.
Yeah.
So permission to coach you right now?
Yep.
Okay. So answer that question for me. Are you consistent with
No.
lead generating, working your database?
No.
Okay. I think before we can, point to any I'm using the word excuse lightly, right? Because
That's
the
fine.
reality is, yes, the market's changing, right? Everything that's going on interest rate wise is affecting demand. We're still in this environment where it's not like there's an influx of inventory that's coming on currently, and you gotta pay attention to our local market compared to national news always, right? So it's tighter right now. But before we can get to that point to where we look at the market for what's going on, we got to look ourselves in the mirror and make sure that we're not the cause of anything that would cause a slowdown. And if you're looking in that mirror and doing that mental audit, I call it, and left with like, yeah, I need to be lead generating more, then find the answers within that first before you really try to find a way to figure out what's going on in the market. Because the reality is, like, there's still, yes, demand is lower. Okay, I'm not going to argue to that point.
Right.
But there's still demand out there. We're still, and it's changing, but we're still in a seller's market. There's more demand than there is homes for sale.
So my question has always been, what is the best, or how do you find the best resources for lead generation? Because when you say lead generation, that's an investment, isn't it?
No, investment in time. I'm talking connect with your people, connect with as many people as you can. Reach out to them. Just further definition of lead generation, further your relationship with as many people as you can through communicating with them. Phone call, coffee meetings, out to dinner, texting, direct messaging, Facebook messaging. I say it, sarcastically, but if you can have a conversation with somebody over smoke signal back and forth, great. We take the term lead generation too literal in the sense of like being disappointed or not understanding that we are lead generating if we're just having conversations with as many people as we can. Now, have it get to a real estate topic some way. And what you're going to find with your business, I can predict, is that if you're just reaching out to people to talk about the weather on a Friday, they're probably good, and you ask about them, you ask about their family, their life, whatever's going on, right? They're probably going to be reciprocal to ask about you, and your business is where it's at, to where they're probably going to say, hey, how's real estate? How's the market? Mission accomplished right there. If it doesn't turn into a lead, turn and burn them. The way that I think about it is schedule your next follow-up with that person that you just spoke with, so that you don't run the risk of 2 years going by before you remember to contact them again. And then on to the next conversation, or touch or message or whatever, right? Or up, if you had a chance or you weren't on it, Andrea's Siderakis's class a couple weeks ago, and how she does it to essentially achieve the same concept. There's different ways that you can go about lead generating. On to the next pop by, on to whatever it is. However, you're going to stay in front of your people, that's lead generating.
Got it.
So flip the switch to where just get into conversation, because the reality is, with the market that's going on, and this was a topic, I think I did it last week, in terms of position yourself to be the economist of choice for your people. Like, there's a lot of turmoil in the world right now. Our real estate industry is a big sector of the economy.
It is.
You have the opportunity to really provide some local insight that, and don't get me wrong, I mean, it may end up scaring people, but it is what it is. If you can be the person that people turn to discuss real life issues or get some insight from, what do you think is going to happen when they actually need to buy or sell or do something? So it's lead generating is just furthering the relationship, so that when they actually need something, they remember you and think of you and contact you. It just takes all these touches, quote unquote, to get to that point to where you're actually remembered.
Is actual purchased lead generation worth it?
Depends on the mindset. It depends on how much you're spending and if you're getting a rate of return on that. But I can tell you that, I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I started my business 10 years ago, really based off of, I mean, I had a $400 a month Zillow budget at that point, and I built a business off of it.
Right.
That's non-existent anymore.
No, it's not.
So it just depends on what you're doing. So here's how I relate to it. And I always say it once of these sessions, that I'm just full of analogies, so I apologize, but some of you have heard this already. Think Thanksgiving turkey and the gravy that goes with it. Your people that is the turkey. The gravy can be whatever leads you're buying. Or, even separate from that, an open house and you meet some new people, or door knocking, or whatever it is, right? The gravy to the turkey is everybody else out there in the world that you have the opportunity to potentially meet. So most people want to have a little bit of gravy with their turkey at Thanksgiving. It's totally fine if you want to eat just dry turkey and have a business that's built off of only your sphere of influence, and that's it. But who the hell is eating gravy soup at Thanksgiving dinner? Hungry now.
Me too.
Does that help?
It does.
Cool. Feel free to reach out anytime if I can further the conversation.
Thank you.
Topic of the day is working with investors. I guess I'll open the floor up. Is there any topics, any questions within that general topic that you guys have taken the time to hop on this call for, that you want me to address, so I can make a note and put a pin in it and come back to it?
I have questions. I have questions about, like premiums investor program that they just rolled out a couple months ago, where you're supposed to, the investor's supposed to be able to get property based on the rent rolls and or having 20% equity in the property already. So say they buy something and they get a good deal on it. I just don't know how to go about that. Choosing properties for an investor to see, and you know, how to prove that there's 20, I guess you just do a CMA and prove that there should be 20% equity in the house.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that, please?
Yeah, I think really the overall topic that we have coming up here, or everything that I'm going to cover, may provide for how to go about that. To be
Okay.
honest with you, I'm not totally familiar with that product and what they're looking for, but I think the concept is just that lending is opening up to where, you know, not that we're getting back to the old days, but, you know, what's changing is that rather than being strictly a loan approved strictly based on financial merit and qualification of the individual buyer, that banks and lenders are now opening up to where, like, hey, this investment property is performing. Why wouldn't we give a loan on it? And this buyer is qualified. Let's do it. So that's my, like, you know, unfamiliar synopsis of what that could be. So, and I think what we'll cover today will really kind of hopefully arm you with like how to go about pursuing, you know, a property with you know, this program or anything else, essentially just representing an investor. Okay. But thank you, Marianne. That's a good question. Frankly, I'm making a note of it just to get myself more familiar with that product. So good stuff. All right. So working with investors, I mean, I'm going to start with like, why am I spending time on this? For those that are familiar with my story, I mean, it's kind of an obvious thing to turn to on my end. I mentioned building my business 10 years ago. I really started off just realizing that I could develop somewhat of a niche type of aspect in terms of how to go about the business and starting off. And I quickly realized like there was an opportunity to where there's just a lot of homes to sell that are investment properties in our markets. And I'll put an asterisk to this whole conversation. Like, I'm not doing investment business in Buffalo. So I don't know the ins and outs of that market like I do Rochester. However, I can pretty much, you know, kind of lump this into a regional aspect, and that, you know, not too much should change from one market to the other. But don't get me wrong, like, yeah, I think in many regards, Buffalo is going to be the big brother to Rochester. So yeah, I would assume, you know, numbers will be different, and obviously neighborhoods and such will be different, and property types and all that. But generally speaking, the region that we're in operates relatively similarly across the board. But you know, I realized like, okay, either whether it's because of location or price point, that there's an opportunity to get business going, is what I realized in my younger days, starting off early in my career, to where like, okay, fine, I'll sell 5 $30,000 homes in order to get to an average price point of one home of 150,000. And that there's, you know, if I can really cut my teeth in that market, it's almost like there's opportunity out there that people are passing up on. And that's what I jumped on early in my career and really kind of catapulted my business off of that. Why that works for our market is, you know, if you just look at real estate from a national or even global perspective, we're still sitting, even with what's happened in the last 5 years, we're still sitting in a market that has a significant price advantage in terms of being lower than what most other major markets have. And certainly most major markets, you know, sure, we may be comparatively speaking at a price point that's similar to, you know, East Jesus, Indiana, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. But, you know, for a mid-sized market where we're at, to have just an overall average price point somewhere around 200,000 in Rochester anyway, and not, you know, I mean, think of other markets where the average price point is like 600,000. And then investment properties, sure, may be under that in cases, but we're just talking about a market that's attainable for investments and investors from the standpoint of like, okay, I don't have to have $1 million in order to get into real estate investing business. Like you can literally start investing in real estate in Rochester anyway with a $50,000 property. And it's not something that needs to be totally bulldozed over and start and rebuilt. So, you know, first point in terms of like why we're going to spend time on it, our region, because of the price points, offers literally a global attraction. Like our team, our business, like we work with every corner of the globe. Asia, Middle East, Europe, every corner of the country. Like the attraction is there. Our market offers a global attraction for investing in real estate because of the price points, and that you don't have to be some high-end real estate developer out of New York City that has, you know, millions of dollars to go towards a project or an investment. From there, mainly because of the price points, the rate of return that's offered for an investment ends up being pretty damn attractive. And you know, at least in Rochester, very common to have a double-digit rate of return, meaning you're making 10+% on the money that you invest. That's really unheard of in other, you know, bigger markets. So put yourself into perspective or in the shoes of, you know, investors from all over the world that are, you know, in whatever market and whatever their price point is. And, you know, you're telling them, hey, you can get into something to start off for 50, 60, $100,000 even. It's going to make you 10% return. They're looking at that like, I can't buy a parking space in New York City for $50,000 a year, and that's not making me anything. And it's going to cost me millions to make a 4% return in other bigger markets. Like the light bulb glows off when people start to understand what the opportunity is with our market. Questions so far? And if anybody that's in Buffalo wants to chime in at any time, because again, like what I'm going to be, you know, putting out there is largely off of my experience in Rochester, right? So if anybody, if there's a significant difference or, you know, just anybody who wants to relate to the difference in price points and stuff like that, you know, please offer it, because I think we got a decent, you know, mix of about half and half from Rochester and then Buffalo, which is good. So basics, you know, why we're going to spend time on this. The price points offer a good rate of return. That's going to have a big attraction into our market from investors from everywhere, locally, nationally, literally globally, guys. Like when I say globally, I'm not exaggerating. Like I've literally done deals before just using Google Translate to communicate with people that are overseas that trust us to represent them. And there is a language barrier, but we're getting everything, you know, that they need in order to make decisions and putting them in profitable investment positions.
Do all investors use the same criteria when looking? You're saying return on investment.
Yeah.
Does that include cap rate? And can you go over cap rate too?
Yeah, no, I plan on going over cap rate, and that, you know, basically cap rate more or less can be kind of a fancy term for return on investment, depending on who you're talking to. But to answer your question, no, the criteria is not going to be the same across the board. And it just depends on what their overall goals or needs are. And some, I'll be real basic with it to say, like, some investors only want to flip. Some investors want to have rental properties and hold them for, a certain amount of time or for the long term. So there's a difference right there. From there, there's just varying degrees of, like, some investors may say, in order for it to make it worth my while to put my money here, I want a 15% rate of return. Others may say I only need 8. So that question, that line of thinking that you have, Marianne, I think it was, in terms of what's your criteria, that's something that I typically come right out of the gate with pretty soon into the conversation of, like, hey, tell me what your criteria is for investing. Like, you're new to this market. You're telling me you want to invest your hard-earned money into a foreign market. What's going to make sense for you to do that? Talk to me about that. This way, just like anything from a, getting to the point where you're working with somebody, there's a, finding the motivation and, setting the expectations from there in terms of how things are going to work. So that if like, their criteria matches what you can offer in this market, you're off and running. If they're looking for a 20% rate of return, and I think what they're going to be able to get is only 12, I'm going to tell them from the start so I don't waste my time. Because what's the point of trying to identify a property where I don't think that I'm going to be able to get you the rate of return that you want?
I have a quick question as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so I agree, the numbers do look really great in Rochester on paper. I don't actually hold any properties right now myself, but then the investor gets the random problem tenant, and with the sort of like anti-landlord laws that we have here, they could really get burned badly. So, like, how does that come into the analysis? You know what I mean? When somebody's analyzing whether it makes sense to invest, the prices are great here, but we're also in a legislatively unfriendly state for investing.
Yep, it's a great point. Something to dive into today. I'll answer it for now by saying, any investor's criteria or what they're willing to do is largely subjective. Meaning it's up to them, right? So one investor may say, yeah, like, I'm really concerned about, the dynamics in play with how New York State operates as a not so much a landlord friendly judicial system, so to speak. Another investor may say, yeah, you know what, I'm budgeting that into the process here and doesn't matter. Still looks good to me. So, to answer your question with specifics, I think I'm going to show a spreadsheet that I use, and I think it just comes down to how you're budgeting for performance. And if you're concerned about evictions, about tenant turnover, about, units getting trashed as a result of all that, then you're probably going to want to up the expense that you're budgeting for around those categories.
Gotcha. Thanks.
But yeah, I mean, it's, that whole point of, like, a criteria not being something that's just a industry-wide thing. And don't get me wrong, like, I just got done talking about this region, these locations offering what can be an industry-wide attraction. That's different than every individual investor in it having a different goal or need or set of circumstances. Kind of, really just like anything in the business we do, right? It comes down to the individual person we're working for, what they need to accomplish, what their goals are, what their needs, what their wants are, and taking it from there and making sure that you're a fit to get them to the finish line versus just spinning your wheels, right? Knowing that, like, yeah, that seems more like a unicorn that you're looking for, but I guess let me try to find it for you. That's a dangerous way to run the business.
Right.
Couple other quick hitters on, like, why we're going to spend time on this or what the opportunity is relative to current times. It's a financial aspect that, generally speaking, real estate investments can be looked at as a hedge against inflation, meaning that, you know, our dollar buys less right now. Like a cash in your bank is essentially worth less right now because of inflation. And if you're using that cash to buy goods and services out there, it's going to cost you more than it has in the past. Now, sure, real estate also costs more than it has in the past. But if you look at real estate as a long-term investment that, generally speaking, has a level of appreciation to it, if you invest that same dollar into real estate compared to just buying whatever, yeah, or other, you know, investments out there, it's going to be a good hedge against what's going on right now. Meaning, like, you're, you know, if you had $100,000 in the bank just sitting there, you'll probably be pretty well off if you put that into a real estate investment and compare it 10 years from now versus just what that, you know, what that money's worth just sitting there with, you know, your savings account appreciation type of thing. Another point is, like, our region is very speculative, guys, meaning like there's, you know, yeah, we've appreciated a lot in the last 5 years, but, you know, there's a lot going on for this region that probably isn't going to stop over the long term. You know, for Rochester, like this Finger Lakes region is just, you know, with wine country and all the fresh water around us, and Buffalo too, like that's a very speculative thing in terms of, like, you know, somebody said the other day to me, like, yeah, this is the Napa of the East. I haven't really thought about it that way, but sure. Okay. I could see that playing out. You know, from there, like I lived in Buffalo in 2006, 2007, and seeing what Buffalo has done in a 15-year time frame. Like I went back there. It was for a concert at whatever the HSBC or wherever the Sabres play pre-COVID, so 2019, and I hadn't been back in a long time. I couldn't believe what happened there with the hotels and the casino. And I lived, so like I graduated college and, you know, I took a job in Buffalo, had no idea where I was going, and young and dumb, and like, yeah, how close to Chippewa can I live? Right. Was the goal. So I got an apartment on Franklin Street, and I forget, Franklin and West Tupper. Okay. Which is a block away from Chippewa, like living the high life. Right. And I wanted to drive by the old apartment, right? And I'm looking, I'm at the corner, I'm looking, like, where the hell is it? They tore the friggin' building down and built a high rise. That's huge development. And here, you know, again, the speculation that could be with these markets is another reason why. I mean, we're stable with these investments already. Imagine what, you know, another 10 years could look like for either of these markets, Buffalo or Rochester. So I don't really see, you know, don't get me wrong, with what's ahead in the next couple of years. Sure, there could be corrections in the market overall to where, you know, prices adjust. But 10 years from now, like, I don't see the same property that's selling for $100,000 only sell for $100,000 10 years from now. Whether it's going to be 120 or 200, who knows? But I just see this market being very safe and very stable from an investment standpoint, whether it's a homeowner or you know, an actual investor moving forward. Now, predictions are dangerous, guys. I'm speaking very candidly to you right now. So just understand, like, kind of build in a CYA element to your business to where, like, you're not guaranteeing that, you know, the house you buy today as an investment property for 60,000, yeah, no problem. Guarantee it's going to be worth 100,000 5 years from now, or whatever the scenario is. Very, very dangerous to get into those conversations. But you can have a conversation similar to what I just did with you, with your clients, of like, here's what the upside could be, or why the upside could be there. And that's different. You're not guaranteeing, because at the end of the day, hey, we don't know, a freaking bomb could go off or whatever. So you just, sorry to be doom and gloom or whatever, but just make sure you understand that when you're having these conversations. Another, I spoke with somebody else. This was actually a MAPS coach, very savvy guy, very experienced guy that works with a lot of powerful people in this company. And he turned me on to this line that's kind of a national perspective of things, saying that, look at a lot of investors nationally, their mindset is to hold the North and flip the South. So like, speaks to our region. Like, there's going to be some long-term aspects going on with it. Another thing to spend time on this, and I think super relevant to where we're at right now in the marketplace, and kind of, back to what Laura was expressing some concern around earlier, is that, investments, the investment property business, there's not really seasonality to it. So like, typically, fall, winter time for our business slows down compared to spring and summer as far as residential homeowner sales. Investors, they don't really care what, if there's snow on the ground. Sure, if they can't see a roof because it's fully covered, that may be a hindrance, but like, they don't care what time of year it is. And if anything, like, this time of year, there can be like a push to get things closed or in the books before the year ends for financial accounting reasons. The other aspect for us as agents is that if you can get into this business and be consistent with it, well, now you've got a consistent level of cash flow because of this lack of seasonality, in comparison to, once the seasonal times hit for our residential businesses, and, kind of, being up in the summer and spring with cash flow, and down, slower in the fall and winter times. So you can really hedge your existing, Johnny and Jane homeowner buying and selling business with investors. All right, let's get into some nitty gritties, right? What I'm going to do eventually, I'll share a spreadsheet here that I use, but what do you need to know? What are the basics? Somebody mentioned a cap rate, right? What's a rate of return? Stuff like that. At the end of the day, investors, the reason I love this side of the business so much is that investors are just like nuts and bolts, dollars and cents. The investment either makes sense or it doesn't. It's a business decision. There's very little emotional type elements involved with it that, really get in the way of the process, compared to, again, Johnny and Jane homeowner, who are, Jane loves it, Johnny hates it, and you're sitting there as the agent. Okay, we'll see you guys on the next one, right? Let me know if anything changes. But, if there's some emotional aspect that's in the way, they're not going to buy that house, nor should they. It should feel like home for a home buyer. For an investor, they don't care. It's just, can tenants live here? Can I make money on it? Period. It doesn't make sense for me to invest my money into it. So, being able to speak to the dollars and cents is important. And, let's just define like how to calculate a rate of return, right? Is basically just what you're going to profit in a year. So your profit being your income minus your expenses, right, is your profit. And what you're going to profit divided by the purchase price, essentially. And then you get different criteria, because some investors may say, well, I want that divided by number. I want that purchase price number to be like, well, I know I'm buying this house for 70, but I got to put a roof on it right away at 15. I want to know that the numbers work at 85, not 70. Because if it doesn't work at 85, that's what I'm looking as my total cost. it doesn't make sense. So in the examples of getting to that percentage type language where, you know, again, the attraction to this market is that there's a lot of opportunity where you can get double digit percentage returns, 10+%. You know, essentially investors want to know if their criteria is 10% for rate of return. Am I going to profit $10,000 off of $100,000 investment that I'm making? That's the, you know, percentage type language around that. We can get real in the weeds with like different categories of calculations and stuff like that. I would urge you to like keep it basic for yourself until you get to the point where, like, you know, you've got that high level, you know, investor who not that knows what they're doing. You want to know what you're doing for anybody starting off, whether they're savvy or just starting off. But, you know, if you got somebody who's using a different type of method to calculate what their criteria is, then just find out what that is and adjust to it from there. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So when you calculate income, expenses, all of these, you know, rate on returns, do you calculate based on the rents that are current or the rents that potentially could be? So if you are looking at an investment property that is a duplex, has two, you know, they're paying 800 each, but you know for a fact that that property can make a lot more. Do you do the math on what it could be or what it is, or somewhere in the middle?
It's a great question. And I'm not answering this to beat around the bush.
Mhm.
The reality is it depends on how the investor wants to look at it.
Okay.
And everything's going to be a case by case, right? Because let's just take to answer your question, let's just take the example where there's a property that we know is just grossly under rented. The tenants have been there for 30 years a piece, and you know, they're paying $400 of rent a month when it should be $1,200. So it's probably not going to make too much sense, in my opinion, to look at that investment based off the current rents, because why the hell would you buy it and then keep that same tenant in there for the next however long you're going to own it at $400 a month?
Mhm.
So yeah, in that event, like, or in that scenario, like, yeah, let's look at what the rent potential could be, and also factor in is what I would do, factor in that, okay, it's probably, you're going to have some additional investment, capital expenditure, expense, whatever you want to call it, in order to replace that tenant, upgrade the unit to get market rent for today, because I'm sure it's, you know, needs a full renovation probably,
Mhm.
and then see what the rent could be, and then run the numbers that way. Because it's probably, in that scenario, it's probably not going to make sense for that investment as a whole if you're just leaving that tenant in there at a super low rent,
Mhm.
right?
Isn't there a
Now,
law, though, that
if you do run the numbers and it makes sense with the low rent, then buy 10 of those, right? Now you're protected by the current rent and you got upside in the market too. Go ahead, Marianne.
Isn't there a law that you can only raise the rent a certain amount? Similar to New York City, like, isn't it 10%?
New York City is very stringent with their laws.
Thought we followed here.
What's that?
I thought we had followed here. So
I honestly don't know what the specifics are in terms of if you have a tenant paying X amount and how much you can whack them with an increase, you know, after their lease is up. So that's a great question. Now, I just admitted to you, I don't know something, right? Have the same type of approach with your clients, like find out. I mean, yeah, sure. Maybe you don't want to just be as candid as I was, but you know, just that's something that can easily be found out. And with that said, make sure you have, you know, one of the topics is going to be kind of the team that you have to do this with, and have an attorney, have an attorney that specializes in evictions too. And have a property manager that's familiar with the ins and outs of this stuff, because they're in the trenches in that side of the business a lot more than we are. Philippa, did I answer everything that you had?
Yes, yeah, that makes
Okay,
sense. Yes,
cool.
thank you.
So, I mean, I'll keep like the basics of what you need to know as an agent representing investors to the point of like, can we speak to whether or not this opportunity makes sense from whatever the criteria is that the investor has? So it's going to be important to establish what that criteria is right out of the gate, and then know like how to calculate by their standards and know whether a property fits into that criteria or not. From there, like, know your market, right? It's going to be tough to operate in any real estate, capacity as an agent if you're not familiar with all the ins and outs of the market. And what I mean by that is, for relative to investments, locations, at least Rochester, like I always describe it as very much like it's a block by block type of, location feel. You can be on one street and 3 blocks over may feel like a totally different neighborhood compared to the other. So like be the boots on the ground for your people so that you know how to relate to opportunities that they're looking at. Know about different investment types in terms of property types and what the rents could be. Like, you got to be familiar with all that stuff. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you a spreadsheet that I use to analyze investments. Can you guys see this spreadsheet? Cool. So what I'll do first is I'm going to take a look at one of our listings. It's a multi-unit property on Nye Park in Rochester. It's listed for $70,069.9. It's a 2-unit property. They've got separate utilities. Okay, meaning the tenant's going to pay their own heat and electric. Generally speaking, at least in Rochester, water is always paid by the owner. The reason for that, not to get too deep in the weeds, but the reason why water is paid by the landlord is that, well, 1, there's typically not separate meters if it's multi-unit property. 2, water is what's called a lienable utility, meaning that if the water bill doesn't get paid for however many years, eventually you could get foreclosed on. So if you have the water bill in a tenant's name and they're just running a car wash and not paying it for, 5 years straight, all of a sudden, like, you're getting foreclosed on, and obviously that's not ideal. So most, and it's a lower cost too, and compared to heat or electric. So most landlords are going to leave that as an expense to them. This is a 2-unit property with 2 bedrooms in each unit. One of them is rented at $825 currently, and the other one is vacant. I know this because it's our listing, but we've got some remarks on the the public remarks here. Obviously you guys know how to find taxes and whatnot in the MLS, but all this is going to be relative to what we're looking at. Let's just fly through the pictures, just to get a general sense of it so we can speak to it. Up and down style, vinyl sided. For city location here, I mean, this is par for the course. Okay. So, if for our market in Rochester, like if you had a buyer who is living in Pittsford or Brighton, they would not used to what condition in a certain city locations would be, then this they may look at this condition and be like, no, thank you. Right. But anyway, so here's a spreadsheet that I use. Okay. This is all, I've got this CYA statement here, right? Spreadsheet is meant to provide projections and estimates only. It's not intended to be concrete evidence of financial performance of a property. Got that in there. This way I can send this out to clients with examples of what I'm thinking the property is going to perform like, and then they can use it to plug and play numbers from there. So I'm just going to run through basic really what we're doing here is running through expenses and what the income could be and what your profit's going to be, and then how the returns look after that. Okay. But, we got a list price of 70,000 and just rounded up. If we're getting financing, I'm using a 25% down payment. Okay. Sure. You can do it with 20 with some lenders. Some single family investments can do as little as 15. So, this is something that you can adjust. I can adjust this to 80% loan to value here easily and use the numbers from there. So this is something that I share with clients and kind of walk them through it the way that I am with you guys, to say, hey, play around with this so that you can, if you need anyway, if you don't have your own spreadsheet, you can come to some conclusions here. But from there, total taxes, these are the taxes right now at 3,100. There's a unit rented at 825. The other unit's vacant. So I'm just going to assume that unit rents at 825 as well. Back to the question before, like, I don't think this, if we're just, we'll get to it, but to jump the gun, cap rate or rate of return right now is 13% for this property. If we just run this at the current rents, it's 2.7%. I don't think anybody's buying that property with that return. So that's, relative to the question that was asked before. Now, before I go any further, get back here. There's a, to me, my mindset about how to do this is very much the word conservative. Okay. Be conservative in your analytics, be conservative in the approach so that you're not left with any one thing going wrong that proves that the numbers don't work. So the way that I've evolved with using this spreadsheet is I essentially describe it to my clients as it's conservative, but realistic. Meaning we're going to budget in certain expense items other than just taxes and insurance. And that's where you got to be careful with what's being marketed with any given listing, because there's a lot of investment marketing out there, so to speak, based on an opportunity that advertises a rate of return, and it doesn't take into account a true set of expenses. So it's like, yeah, sure, the numbers are going to look great if you're only paying taxes and insurance and, a water bill. It doesn't account for vacancy. It doesn't account for having to continually improve the property. It may not account for lawn care, snow maintenance, or property management, or extra utility expenses, stuff like that. It's not going to account for having to put a roof on the property in the next year, stuff like that. So take a conservative analytical approach. Questions around that, it's a very important topic. Like, don't get this, like, I'll put it to you this way. If an investment makes sense for somebody because it's within $100, margin of it making sense or not, it ain't going to work. It ain't probably not going to work short term. And it's certainly not going to work long term, because the way that I describe it is like, you can get, you may have a great year as a landlord and you don't hear from your tenant at all. We just rent checks in the mail every month. You're paying your taxes, you're paying your insurance, you had nothing to put into the property. And you may make 20+% on your money that year based on your initial investment. Well, the next year, the tenant stops paying, you have to go through an eviction process, they trash it on the way out, and now you've collected minimal rent and you've got all this money to put into it. That's going to be a totally different rate of return for that year, right? But Marianne?
And what about C of Os? How long is a good property to have the C of O in place? So say the C of O doesn't need to be renewed for 2 years. Is that good, or should it be longer?
Well, so I could speak to the Rochester market and specifically in the city of Rochester. When you get into the suburbs, it's really, I'm not gonna say less of an issue, but definitely more casual compared to the properties in the city. So speaking to the city of Rochester properties, there's not a straight answer, unfortunately. It's every property address is unique because they could be flagged or in a district that's quote unquote high risk. Like lead paint, for example, can flag a property to where now instead of a C of O having to be renewed every 6 years, it may have to be renewed every 3 years. And different property types fall in that category too, where generally speaking, it's either a 3 or a 6 year C of O. Now, with a sale, it gets really complicated because it's just, don't ask me why, but in the city of Rochester, for 2-unit properties only, for duplexes only, if that property sells 2 years after the C of O was last renewed, even though it's a 6-year C of O, that property sells 2 years and a day after the last renewal, and there's 4 years left on it. Well, it's not transferable to a buyer for whatever reason. So the good news is, and I'm sure Buffalo has this too, to where the city offers, pretty detailed information on the process and the requirements of different property types and this and that you can familiarize yourself with and just having your arsenal, so to speak, of working with investors so that you're sending it to them and checking the boxes on the due diligence.
Do you check the demolition list right away on any city properties?
Not necessarily, because part of my due diligence process, what's nice about in Rochester is that the C of O is listed and violations on it are listed in the same website and section as where you would get city taxes to verify. So if it's on a demolition list, then it should be tagged as having violations. And if it's tagged as having violations, there's a set of due diligence around that. And then you find out what's what. I think, something on a demolition list is going to be fairly obvious as to why it's on that list. So that kind of, your radar is probably already up. All right, back to the spreadsheet and kind of quick crash course here on what we're doing. What are we doing here? There we go. Okay, everybody see the screen? All right, so this section here, price, financed amount, if they're doing it based on their, their loan to value, right? So we're using 80% here, 20% down payment. Total taxes and rental income. Again, be conservative. So like, here's an element here. The taxes on this property are based on the current assessment. Depending on who I'm working with and what their criteria is, I may plan for a reassessment and the taxes to go up so that they're making decisions based on worst case scenario type of thing. Some investors may want to see, what the rent could be or what it currently is. So it's all variable. Okay. But now, over to my, calling a profitability model here. Really two sections of this. This section here in the middle accounts if an investor is getting a mortgage, and then this section over here is if they're paying cash and don't have a mortgage. Okay, but the first thing I'm going to do is start with rental income, and if you notice, I've got 1650 and 1485 here. Why those numbers are less is that I've got essentially 90% of the 1650. Which accounts for vacancy. So my conservative model is let's buffer into the numbers 10% vacancy, which frankly, if you have a unit turnover, or you have a property that turns over, very rarely are you just, they leave on the 31st and somebody's moving in on the 1st. So at minimum, you're going to have, 1 month vacant. That's 1 out of 12 is 8.3%. So again, conservative yet realistic. And in the years when it's 100% rented and they paid 100% of the time, great. Your numbers are that much better than what we're going to calculate moving forward. Okay. Mortgage payment. This is a Excel like calculation of how to do it. So, that's something that, well, I could share this. So, anybody just email me after this and, I can send it to you. But and that way you can just, I have no problem. You use it yourself. But the one thing, this is the interest rate. I'm using 8% for an interest rate. A, conservative. B, the interest rate on an investment property is always going to be higher than an interest rate on a, owner occupant loan. Okay. Majority of the time, I should say. Vast majority of the time. So here's the monthly, and I'm doing this per month. Okay. So we got $1,485 income coming in. We got our mortgage payment because they're financing, $411. We got our taxes. It's just current taxes divided by 12. Insurance, fairly obvious, need insurance on all properties, right? $75 a month for an investment property, in this case, a 2-unit property. That's probably pretty fair. You may want to be even more conservative and use 100. Can't argue with that. My logic is like, I'd rather plan for the worst. And if I can get insurance that works for me at $50 a month, great, I'm plus 50 compared to what I'm analyzing before I pull the trigger on this investment. Maintenance. To me, the way I think about this is like, not so much we have to put a roof on, but like there's going to be maintenance to these properties. Tenants have landlords. They're going to call you or your investor when something goes wrong and you're going to have to fix it. So frankly, a month where $148 worth of maintenance, that could just be the toilet was leaking and somebody had to go out and fix it. And it was a really minor repair and it cost $150 all day long this day and age, right? So this kind of accounts, I'm using 10%, okay, of the rent collected. And that, kind of hopefully accounts for, you get a few months with nothing and then a water heater blows and you got to spend $800, right? So this is different than analyzing a property and like, okay, I know I'm going to have to sink 30 grand into it. Different maintenance category. This is just ongoing every day or every month stuff that's bound to come up. I'm budgeting 10%. Depending on the property condition or the location or other factors, you may want to go lower or higher. If you're investing in something that's a brand new build, in theory, it shouldn't need a lot of maintenance, right? So you may be able to kind of buffer that at whatever, 2.5%, 5%, whatever you want to do. If you're investing in a property that's 100 years old, is in crap condition now, you may want to go higher than 10%. Utilities. This isn't formulated. This is something that I would fill in based on the scenario. What I'm including in this utility section would be lawn care, snow removal if necessary, and then the utilities. Like, again, we've got this example where there's separate utilities where the tenant's paying the heat and electric, but again, you're paying water. So that's probably going to be, for 2 units, about $100 a quarter, if not more. So call it $30, $40 a month. And then I'm buffering an extra $60 a month spread out over the year, in this case for lawn removal or lawn care and snow removal. I may even be low on the utilities. The other thing, very important with the separate utilities, there could be a house meter that you have to pay for that controls the lights on the outside and the hallways, the basement. That could be on a separate meter. It should be on a separate meter, but it's not always the case. So you may, even though it's separate utilities, you still may have an RG&E bill as a landlord. And with what we're in right now, like these RG&E bills, Rochester Gas and Electric is, going nowhere but up, right? From here, property management. If an investor is self-managing a property, then, obviously this isn't going to be so much of an expense. But their criteria may be like, well, I got to pay for accounting, I got to pay for this or that, and I do want to have a budget for that. But here I'm just factoring in that most property managers local to our market anyway, is a 10% of the rent collected. So here we are, just 10% of this $14.85 a month. So those are your expenses. We got our income of $14.85, less our mortgage, less taxes, less insurance, less maintenance to budget for, less utilities to budget for, less management. So in this investment, you're left with a monthly profit of $318 and yearly profit of a little over $3,800. Now, let's look at the return percentages. You got into this property with $21,000. How I got to that is your down payment of $14,000, 70 minus 56. And then I'm factoring in, I'm probably over conservative, but 10% for additional closing costs, $21,000. So a lot of investors will like to look at the performance based off of what money they're putting into. So in this case, it's $21,000. Got into a $70,000 property for 21. Your break-even point is at what point does your yearly profit break even on the money that you put into it? So just the profit divided by the total investment. Here we got 5.5 years before you make your money back on the initial investment. Depending on the investor, they may say that's good or bad. Subjective thing. Just sure, there's industry standard type things, right? But from there, the cap rate. Generally speaking, a cap rate can be defined, because this is a term that you hear a lot, is essentially the money you make divided by the purchase price. Some investors may say it's the money, your profit divided by the overall value of the property. So it becomes somewhat subjective, but depending on the source, they'll have different definitions of it. I'm looking at it essentially as a rate of return. However, this is annual profit off of the total cost, the purchase price of the home. Well, we didn't pay $70,000. So I'm going to look at it. If I'm an investor that's financing, I'm going to look more at my cash on cash return, which would be the annual profit divided by the money that I put up out of my pocket. And here we're at 18%. Not bad. The other model would be, let's remove financing from the equation. This is set up to where, the mortgage payment is out here and all these other numbers just carry over. And now if you pay cash for this, now you're making over $700 a month, almost $9,000 a year. And now you're at a 12% rate of return. The annual profit divided by what you paid for it. Now you could get an investor who's real analytical and say, okay, well, that's $70,000. That doesn't include my closing costs. Fine. Spreadsheets can be altered. This is just base. Something to work off of, get the conversation started is the way to think of it. At the end of the day, the investors got to decide for themselves what makes sense or not. Generally speaking, 12% rate of return for a real estate investment, pretty damn good in most people's eyes. This investment would take 8 years to break even on. I'm all right with that. Questions about this?
Can you repeat the math you was doing to determine cash on cash return and cap rate and those figures?
Yep. So really, cap rate is just always going to be based on the purchase price, in my opinion. And, so it's essentially profit over price. So it's just when you're financing a property, your profit's going to be lower because you have the mortgage to pay. So here the difference of a 5.5% rate of return compared to 12% comes in that $410 a month that you're paying to the bank. And then the cash on cash return is 18% in this example, because here we're just doing profit divided by the total cash that you put out as the investor to get into that game.
I wasn't expecting the break-even point to be longer for cash than it was for having a mortgage. I realize that you're investing more money that you've got to get back out, but I initially thought that because you're saving money on interest, that it would be less time.
Well, one thing with the mortgage is this is based off a 30-year amortization. Okay. So, not all investment property loans will have a straight 30-year term. So that's where this model can be, cause some complication. But yeah, I mean, I think it just you see the difference in profit, right? You got 3,800 versus 8,700. So $4,000 a year difference, approximately $5,000, sorry. And compared to, almost 50,000 difference in the actual money that you're putting up as the investor. So yeah, I mean that, the comment you made about the difference in pricing really, really drives that.
Would you be open to sharing the spreadsheet?
Yeah, I'm gonna put my email in the chat here and just email me individually anytime and I'll fire this off to you.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions about like income, expenses, how to get, this is again,
Hello?
like, keep it basic, guys. Don't get into something to where like you're trying to, have this be some Wall Street analytical thing,
I have a question. How do you, I don't know if it's pertinent, but how do you calculate the taxes you pay as an investor on a property like this?
like to the IRS, you mean?
Yeah, so at the end of the year, how do you, yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if it's pertinent, but like, how do you calculate how much of this then you pay?
It's definitely pertinent. And my response is going to be, I got to punt to your CPA on that.
Yeah, the tax, okay.
Right? Because at the end of the day, like how you structure an investment is going to be different from the next guy and the next guy. And it's all relative to how the accounting is working in any individual's life, and it's like a single asset. It's going to be different than, something where there's an LLC and multiple properties tied to it. You could really get yourself in trouble if you're commenting on, the accounting methods used, after you own an investment property. So now, with that said, definitely be versed on some of the concepts.
Mhm.
For example, like capital gains and stuff like that. Make sure people know that, say you had somebody who wanted to flip a property, but they had no knowledge of capital gains, and you sell that property for them in the end, and then they call you come, April 15th the following year. You tell me about capital gains. Well, yeah, dude, I'm not your accountant, but it's just kind of that overall, to a degree, part of that fiduciary responsibility that we have with our clients to make sure that they, as much as possible, know what they're getting into. It's not our responsibility to be their accountant. And that's very important to understand. Like, do not give accounting advice. If you're having a conversation around some specifics in accounting relative to your experience, end that conversation with, I'm not telling you any of this is set in stone. Get with your CPA. This is strictly my opinion of it, and I very well could be wrong. However, you gotta, cover your butt on that. It's very important.
Right, just flag it and be like, this might be something you want to speak to a tax person. Okay.
100%.
I have something about the expenses.
Yeah.
Okay, I worked in property management, and one thing you don't have on there that investors need to know too, if you go with a property management company, it is 10%. But let's say they want you to find them a tenant. The
Yep.
background checks were typically, like 2 years ago when I worked in one, it was $25 is all you could charge the tenant. And most of the background checks were over that. So
Yep.
that's another expense to the investor. And we used to charge every investor 1 month's rent to find them a tenant.
Yep. 100%
So-
good point. And that's where, again, you gotta keep this as just like a basic, example of how things could play out. And, it's not the end all be all with this type of spreadsheet. So your ability to explain those aspects that aren't on this spreadsheet is definitely key. That's a great point, Laura.
And another thing with when a landlord or an investor sells his property, what is it? It's a 1013 or something. They have to buy something right away.
A
Is that
1031 exchange.
1031 exchange, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, I just did that last year and I didn't know what it was. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really should know this.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you're looking to continue to invest, it's a great thing to take advantage of. So, it's a lot of people take advantage of that in terms of, okay, I'm going to sell one asset, buy low, sell high, right? I'm going to sell this asset high,
Yep.
buy another asset low, start it all over again, defer the taxes. It's not that you're totally avoiding taxes, you're just kicking them down the road. But, it's a great thing to take advantage of. Again, don't be the expert on 1031 exchanges. I'm not. I
No,
wouldn't even remotely get into like how to, the benefit, the specifics of the benefit of that other than what I just said. And that's okay. People don't be fearful of that approach. Like people get it. Like they don't want you to be their CPA. If they do, like might not be a great client. Because if they can't have the wherewithal, the reason I say that is that they can't have the wherewithal to know that they're going to need their own accountant and their own attorney for evictions and their own property manager. If you're not, if they're not managing it and you don't do management, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't feel like they can come to you with general questions, but your expertise has to be somewhat limited in this field because there's so many different, very detailed avenues that investors have to go down that can open a world of liability on your end. Couple things that I know we're over time. I've got a few minutes here, so I don't mind spending it. Appreciate you guys hanging around. How to be effective with this business. Okay, some tips here. One is like a proactive approach, like provide due diligence, like we're doing here. Provide the options, and especially with out-of-town investors, like you could really hit a home run with this to where, like, say this property on Nye Park, you go check it out, get a file full of pictures, some videos, if the listing agent and tenants are allowable to it. Well, now you could sell this to anybody in theory. You can go down your list, pitch it to one guy, they don't like it, next guy, until you find somebody who likes it. Because hey, I know everything I can know about this property. Here's a due diligence kind of offer memorandum type of thing. And build a database around investors that you can then market to separately. Another very important, I mentioned it earlier, but have a property management relationship, because and I've been doing this 10 years, guys. I literally just light bulb went off last month. Literally. How am I going to sell an investment property to somebody with money who's out of town, is willing to take the risk to invest into a market, not see a property in person, isn't managing it himself? How am I going to sell that property if I'm just telling them like, here's a few management referrals, have at it? People with money are going to stop there. Like, yeah, this sounds great. You got, looks good. Condition looks good. You're telling me the neighborhood's good. I don't know. I've never been there. I'll take your word for it. These numbers look legit. Who the hell's managing this? Otherwise, I'm just buying a piece of paper and a piece of real estate that's not going to get managed, going to lose me money ultimately. So have things teed up to where like you've got a due diligence offered and a manager that's standing by it too, confirming the same and ready to manage it. Go ahead, Marianne.
How do you tell them the neighborhood's okay when it's a fair housing issue?
Great question.
Speak to that.
Great question. So here's how I approach this. And it's fair housing, serious stuff as it should be. And you had to be very delicate with this conversation. So obviously it's not just like, it's a bad neighborhood. Can't say that, right? So, the conversation I would have with somebody is, look, it's all subjective. I need to encourage you to do your own research, because you may research the Rochester, New York market and follow the news and come to the conclusion of there's been 75 homicides or whatever this year. And like, why the hell would I invest in that market? And that's totally fine for your criteria, right? Or you may, be okay with whatever that, the crime statistics that are for any given neighborhood or city. But ultimately it's subjective to where you got to decide for yourself, Mr. Investor, like what makes sense for you and what doesn't. With that said, I'm not here to, want to develop a relationship. I want to make sure you're protected. I'm going to shoot you straight as much as I can, but you have to understand that I have to be careful from a fair housing, law standpoint of what I say. And I can't just tell you it's in a bad neighborhood, or even the other end, it's in a good neighborhood. Okay. So here's, how I go about this in terms of like, look at, in my opinion, with my experience and knowing what I know, I'll use a grading scale, A to F. And even that's probably dangerous on my end, I'll admit, but that's really the only way I know how to go about it, other than just to say, punt and, go ahead and do your own research. So, hey, this, I think if you did your research, I think, and you had your own grading scale that was similar to mine, you'd probably come to the conclusion that this may be a C- neighborhood.
Kind of going off of that, like fair housing neighborhoods and all of that, how do you go about, because there's a couple of neighborhoods that I personally think are about to explode. They're not there yet. And this is just personal. What do I know about real estate, right? I haven't been doing this for too long, but just looking at them, I was like, there's some opportunity here. So how do you convey that without saying?
So that's to skirt this, great point, to skirt this, concern about getting into, liability around fair housing conversations. The more specific you can be with examples, the better. So that if you have like, hey, they're building a Wegmans in this neighborhood. Generally speaking, whenever that happens, good things happen, good things follow. That sort of example.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the more, if you have resources to point to in terms of like, there's this news story, or, that sort of stuff. I think generally speaking, like, if you either are providing that, due diligence where like you're providing photos, video, etc., like if you're getting the outside too, that generally can tell a lot. If all the houses around the property look like well cared for, owner occupant, lived in homes with nice landscaping and this and that, people probably come to their own conclusions. If every other property is boarded up next to it, then there's ways to go about it without having to say something that potentially, gets you in trouble, so to speak. With that said, I approach this like every person you're talking to, if you don't know them, is a, whatever the term is, state whistleblower, or whatever you want to call it.
Tester.
Yeah, exactly. So just be careful with it, guys. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's not a thing. I mean, it can be dangerous. I mean, you have to be careful, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't just go around and be like, it's a bad neighborhood. Because just because you think it's a bad neighborhood, I may live in that neighborhood and be great with it, right? So it's all subjective, but the more factual evidence type stuff that you can provide, the better. From there, if there's not that, and ultimately the practical side of this is, how do you build a trusting relationship with somebody who's willing to invest their hard-earned money through you? Like, yeah, I mean, you got to find a way to have a candid conversation without, using certain, words that wouldn't be deemed to be allowed if you get in front of an ethics committee or whatever it is. I think most of those words are fairly obvious, so just avoid them. That's why it's just like subjective. Here's my grading scale. It's what I think. Why would something be a D or an F? Well, we're looking at crime statistics. We're looking at, the evictions, tenant turnover, the houses around it, etc. My grading scale is going to be different than others. I have never felt unsafe in the entire city of Rochester in my career. What else, guys? That's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. So,
Okay, I have one more question, and
By the
that, sorry, and that's kind of related to what we're talking about. What do you think about, I know we are not really allowed to, I think, use this term, but up and coming neighborhoods, when you see something, I was like, okay, it's not there, there's a potential there. Do you use that term, up and coming? Do you tell clients like, I see potential in this, or you just stay away from that and just stay with, numbers?
I think back to what we talked about earlier is why, and providing that reason.
Mhm.
And then you don't even have to say up and coming. Because, for example, if you're in Rochester and this is kind of like, well, I can relate to it. The 19th Ward in Rochester is across the river from University of Rochester and Strong Memorial Hospital, biggest employer in the region. So 10 years ago, like 19th Ward wasn't what it is now. So conversations I was having was like, hey, we got the biggest employer in the region. They're never going anywhere. If they are, like, we're all screwed. And that side of the river is, more or less like fully developed, or, kind of already in its mainstay that it's in.
Mhm.
And we're seeing the growth happening, spreading west, coming over on the other side of the river. So speculative play could be that continues. Who knows? If you listen to that 10 years ago and started investing then, you're pretty freaking happy right now. So now relative, you can have a similar conversation to where there's other pockets on that same side of the river and say, hey, here's what's happened in the last decade here because of this. Maybe there's, gentrification is the term, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that continues and good things continue to happen here
Mhm.
in this specific pocket.
Yeah.
Versus like, this is up and coming. To be able to say that, I think it's more effective for you to just tell somebody why and leave it out of the equation of using that term.
Right, okay.
It's definitely a touchy topic, guys. I mean, like, this is recorded. I'm dancing around what I say right now, right? So, you know, you got to be careful with
Right.
it. And it should be. It's, you know, not going to get into it, but, you know, it should be a touchy topic. It's not fair to just like, you know, pigeonhole, you know, make assumptions, whatever you want to call it. So,
Well, even, we can't be responsible for knowing everything about any particular area. You
Mhm.
know, we don't work in one particular area. You know, if you miss the news for a week, you might not know something that went on, whatever. We can't be responsible for giving advice on that kind of thing.
yeah. And I mean, I think to that point, like if you're not familiar with with an area, then find a way to admit that and find a way to provide value to where like, here's some research that will help both of us or whatever, however you want to phrase that.
Yeah,
I think the point is like the practical side of this conversation around like actually, you know, converting relationships into investors is to be able to speak candidly and frankly without crossing that line into fair housing violation territory. Because at the end of the day, if you're just saying, try Google out and find out for yourself,
what service are you providing?
yeah, onto the agent that's going to shoot me straight is what the client's probably thinking.
Right. I am thinking about a very specific area in Rochester that I'm very interested in, and like, how do I convey that to, you know, my clients, investors or not, that this might be a really good opportunity without steering or without telling them like, hey, this is the place where you should buy. But I think that's good advice. Just be like, hey, look at what's happening around. You do the rest of the math. Yeah, I think
Yeah, no, and
Yes,
therefore it's not steering. If you're saying, hey, here's what could happen.
right.
This could also happen 6 blocks over or whatever it is. What if, do you mind me asking what neighborhood or what area?
Beechwood.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I don't think I see it. I lived in New York City for years. I lived in Bushwick, and I lived in Bushwick when it was nothing. And then I saw it develop. Just to give you an idea, when I first moved to Bushwick, my rent was $400 a room. And in the years that I was there, it went up to $1,200 per bedroom in a very short period of time. And I see Beechwood kind of like having that same, not as, obviously is not as quick growth, obviously.
No, I get it. So here's how I would explain it. It's like, okay, we have this Beechwood neighborhood. Well, one, you could do, you know, a quick Google would show you that the 14609 zip code is one of the hottest zip codes in the country. So make of that what you will. How they print those articles based on what data, frankly, I don't know, but that's there. We've got you're pretty close to North Winton Village, which has really boomed in the last, you know, however many years you want to say, and has, you know, quickly become one of the, you know, most popular locations in the whole city. And you're a stone's throw away from that. So just again, this word gentrification, to me, I don't think that's a fair housing violation word. Shouldn't be. And you know, things happen when you're the next neighboring location to somewhere that's hot. You also have your sandwich between North Winton Village and Rochester Public Market, where they're dumping a ton of money into it. High class restaurants are getting into there, and this and that, and you know, you're surrounded by growth.
Growth, yeah.
Why wouldn't it make sense for this area to have potential of that too?
Right.
We have that market trends available to us through the MLS. That's pretty, with the nice graphics and everything. And you
Right.
could do the certain zip codes. You could do a bunch of zip codes and show a bunch of zip codes so that you're not steering just to one.
Yeah, and I think, you know,
So the growth and the property growth and stuff over months, years, whatever.
and that's where it gets real tangible and specific and statistic related, which is great. You know, another conversation I have with people is like, look, at the end of the day, if you're not familiar with these neighborhoods, if you're local, drive around. Because me telling you this neighborhood's a B+, you may drive around and be like, what are you talking about? I couldn't get out of there quicker, whatever the line is, right? And, relating to out of town people, if you're thinking or, if you're relating to it that way, we're giving, these grades, so to speak, add a grain of salt to where it's like, look at, this is my opinion. You
Mhm,
may be here, drive around and say, what the hell are you talking about?
mhm.
It's all beauty in the eye of the beholder type of thing. And my eyes see things differently than yours will, and on to the next.
Mhm.
It's definitely a touchy subject and one that can't clearly be defined or answered, but it's just a matter of, providing value, providing your opinions without crossing that line is, yeah, I mean, frankly, it's something that we all need to,
Feedback.
find a way to educate on, whether it's investor or, I mean, it's constantly coming up, right? Just with people that are buying their homes too. So.
Cool.
I don't know. I'd rather not give my opinion and lose a customer. It's too scary.
Mhm.
No, you gotta be careful of that for sure. So. All right. Anything else? Quick? Cool, guys. You got my email in the chat. Happy to share that spreadsheet. So just feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you.
Jason, thank you so much.
All right, guys, no problem. Take care. See you next week, hopefully.